Okay, welcome everybody, and also welcome to the viewers at home. Just before I forget, don't forget to turn off your phone or put it on silent mode. It's quite a zen if we do that. So I will start with 3 lines from a famous Zen master. And he said, "First the mountains and waters are the mountains and waters. Then the mountains and waters are not the mountains and waters. But in the end, the mountains and waters are the mountains and waters." So this might not sound very logical, and I need to warn you for that, because that will probably happen more often this afternoon. Because the Zen tradition tries to raise us above logic. But behind these simple lines, there are some very deep thoughts. Because you could say that in these 3 lines, the whole essence of Zen is hidden, which is also the essence of Theosophy, because Zen is nothing else than one of the branches of the Theosophical, the universal wisdom, that forms the basis of all great religions and philosophies of life. So we will try to show you some principles of this universal wisdom or Theosophy this afternoon, so you can work with them yourself. So if you are under the impression that I will talk you from stress to Zen this afternoon, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you a bit, because all I can do is just give you some thoughts that you can work out independently in your own life and in your own situations. But as the Theosophia offers universal thoughts, you can apply these for sure to free yourself from stress and also to help others free themselves. So what are we going to speak about this afternoon? This lecture will consist of 2 parts. And in the first part, we will try to answer the question why in the first place talk about from stress to Zen, and a little introduction to what is exactly Zen. Because if we wish to know how to get from stress to Zen, of course we first need to know a bit about what Zen is. And that will also define our perspective on stress. We will get to this after the break, so no stress, we will get there. And of course we end with how to get from stress to Zen. We have time for questions after each part, but if something is not clear, needs a little more explanation in between, just ask your questions, and there's no problem, we can help you with that. In the break you have time to take a closer look at our information, at our books. We have a library down the hall, and because there's a lot more. This is just a first introduction, a lot more to talk about what these thoughts are based on. And we will end this lecture around 4 o'clock, but there is still time for you to stay and just have a talk. So to start with, why from stress to Zen? Well, these are some recent figures from research from the last 2 or 3 years. That 1 in 4 employees in the EU suffers from stress. In the US, it's even 1 in 3 citizens that feel they are living in extreme stress. Some recent research just showed that in Holland, Dutch employees, 1 in 6, also suffers from burnout caused by stress, and that's an increase from 11% to 16% in the past 10 years, so that's really increasing. And we also see that stress complaints start earlier and earlier in life. So even school children are complaining about stress right now in during their school time. So you would almost stress out from these numbers alone. But I guess it's more helpful to look at how we can cope ourselves. What is the mindset we can find to deal with any situation? Because we can blame the outside world, but of course that doesn't really help us much. But yeah, we all know about Zen. The Zen tradition has left its mark. So we even speak of Zen as a sort of mindset as opposed to stress. People talk about, okay, I really have to get Zen or hope to be more Zen, etc. But what is Zen exactly? Well, let's come back to those 3 lines that I started with, about the mountains and waters. And there's actually an article of one of our Theosophical thinkers, Gottfried de Perucker, the 4th leader of the Theosophical Society. And in his article, 3 Stages of Visioning Truth, he really points out what the essence of this Zen thought is. And he explains 3 stages of the opening of a human being to truth. And that starts with, once the heart of a human being is touched and is opened, even he himself doesn't know of it yet. And this opening of the heart depends on his mindset, because there are generally 2 types of thinking, you could say. You could say that a human being could just look around and see the world, the mountains and the waters, just like they are, mountains and waters. And then he places himself at the center of the world. He just takes his own perception as the starting point, trusts his own senses, and thinks more or less, okay, what you cannot see, that doesn't exist. So facts are only acknowledged when they fit with his previously formed opinions. Now, the second type of thinking sees truth as something in itself. That means that instead of personal considerations as a starting point, one looks for a universal test to judge things. And the second type of thinking is necessary to get to truth. And it starts with wonder, asking yourself questions, and investigating things independently. And you might call this the scientific phase of truth finding, looking for the how of things. And mostly the first thing we do is start using our intellect. We're going to measure things to find out more about the world that surrounds us. So we start to measure the height of the mountains, the depth of the waters. We collect all kinds of data, and we start to name and to label everything, to classify things, to categorize things. But of course, there is this question, okay, can you measure everything? And is all the information, all that data that you collect, is that really helpful for a bigger understanding? Because despite all the data we collect, we most of the times do not get much closer to the key questions in life. What is the essence of life? Where do we come from? Why are we here? So all these data, they only describe the phenomena from the outside. But what is actually the noumena, the driving forces behind all these phenomena, these mountains, these waters? Now, the materialistic perspective, that all is mere chance, really only disguises our ignorance. You could say that chance is a word that we use to label those things we do not understand yet. We see mountains and waters constantly changing. They are not for a moment the same, but what is really the underlying force driving that? What is the underlying force of their existence? And then we have to dig deeper. And by further study, we come to the second phase of seeing truth. We understand that all things are really only appearances. They are like shadows, only phenomena of deeper lying causes that brought them into existence, like the laws of nature, for example. And if mountains and waters are only consequences of a greater underlying cause, they are just appearances, and they are illusory in a sense. So you could say the mountains and waters are not the mountains and waters. And actually this whole ever-changing universe we perceive around us is transitory. you might also say it is illusory, because there is an underlying cause that is escaping from our perception, that makes the universe, well, go around and changing all the time and taking care of or causing all the motion that we can perceive. But following the same reasoning, we can also recognize our own body as such a phenomenon. It's also constantly changing, just an outer appearance that is, in a sense, illusory as well. But, as we know, we are not our body. Our body just hides the inner force within, what you can call our consciousness. That voice which, at moments of silence, just breathes, I am. We cannot exactly define or name this inner force, but it feels more real than anything else. And then we realize that what applies to us equally applies to the mountains and waters. In essence, we are all one. This is the philosophical phase, explaining the why of things. And then we can conclude, because everything coming from the same source, everything originating from that one unknowable, unspeakable, causeless cause, that inner force that also we can recognize in ourselves. Just because everything has the same cause, and this cause or origin being infinite, boundless, it cannot be disconnected from all the outer appearances that sprung from it. So even these outer appearances are, in essence, that cause. So the boundless, being boundless, is also in the here and now. And the circle closes again. You could say the mountains and waters are the mountains and waters in the end. They are as real as anything else because they cannot be separated from that one underlying reality that is boundless, that is everywhere. So it's also in the here and the now. So we then discover our unity with all that surrounds us. And this, you could say, forms the religious phase of seeing truth, the what of things. And if we act correspondingly from this notion of unity, we will forget ourselves and we will always act compassionately, and brotherhood becomes actually a fact, a reality. And this is actually the thing that all religions point to. And it is, in essence, the Theosophical thought that has been also so clearly expressed by these Zen metaphors and stories. You might also call it seeing into one's own nature, because if we just see ourselves as also one of the, results or something that springs forth from this inner cause, we can also go back inside, look at our own nature, and recognize what the Buddhists call Buddha nature. That actually is the same, the more real underlying force that drives everything that also surrounds us. And that's what they say, that actually everything is, in a sense, Buddha nature. Everything not only has Buddha nature, but is, in essence, Buddha nature. So now if we recognize that Buddha nature, and we will start to see and live from that, it will be the end of stress, and we will be able also to free many others from stress. So that is just in short, in this little explanation of these 3 lines, the essence of this Zen thought. And we will elaborate a bit further, also looking at the history. And we already talked about Buddha nature, so that starts with actually the origin, Gautama the Buddha himself. Because Zen Buddhism is just one of the forms of Buddhism. And the Buddha was a teacher living 2,500 years in the past from now. and who at some point in his life vowed not to return to his birthplace, Kapila, before having seen the other shore of life and death. And by the other shore is meant a state of consciousness that rises above this world of phenomena, including life and death. And at some point in life he reached this state of consciousness, he became enlightened, and afterwards he spent the rest of his life spreading his message, how to emancipate yourself from suffering. And he always emphasized that each has to find liberation for himself. Actually, his last words were, "Work out your own salvation with diligence." Now, his example shows us that it is possible to reach a state of enlightenment in this world, in the here and now, that it is the potential of each human being to reach this state, and also that each human being can only reach this state independently by own effort. Now, the Buddha is an example to us all, and by spreading his teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, he showed us how we can reach Buddhahood in just a few simple lines, that each one is able to apply in his own life. And I will shortly show them. So these are the Four Noble Truths, starting with the truth of suffering, that pain and suffering accompany all manifested things. Think about manifested things as all these phenomena like the mountains and water springing forth from the bigger underlying boundless cause, but which are in essence transitory, which are transitory but in essence infinite. Secondly, the truth of the origin of suffering, and there is pointed to our attachment to those transitory phenomena. So because we have an attachment to all these things that we perceive, which in the end will change and will be gone in a few seconds sometimes even, or will die, that is causing suffering. But there's a possibility to remove that cause of pain and suffering, and we can do that by seeing through the illusion of all these seemingly separated phenomena, by recognizing the underlying reality or oneness. And how to do that? That is by following the path, the Eightfold Path that leads to this removal of pain and suffering. And this is this Eightfold Path. Well, we can spend the whole afternoon talking about this, so we only have time just to give you an idea of what the Buddha's teachings were. Right view, right intention, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right contemplation or mindfulness, and right concentration or meditation. And you see, these are really relative rules. It's not something, okay, you have to do this or you have to do that exactly but it's, okay, what is right? You have to, it can always grow. Reasoning from the boundless, there is always a bigger picture, a wider comprehension possible about what is right. So we can, even the Bodhisattvas can still work on this. Now, these teachings were given out publicly, but the Buddha also gave esoteric teachings to his pupils. So that means they were only addressed to those willing to carry the responsibility of spreading the message that Buddha brought themselves. And in the end of his life, the Buddha asked his pupils to gather around him for instruction, like they always did. But this time the Buddha didn't say a word. He only held up a white flower. And all his pupils looked at him, a bit confused. But there was one pupil, Mahakashyapa, who immediately understood and smiled. And Buddha saw him smiling, and after that handed him the flower and spoke I have the most precious spiritual treasure, which I now hand over to you, O Venerable Ma Kashyapa. Pointing to a message that could be only handed over from mind to mind or heart to heart, that was too deep and universal for intellectual analysis. And from that point on, Ma Kashyapa became the Buddha's successor. And actually this legendary story has more or less the same message as that story from the mountains and the waters. Because it points to the one reality, the all, the infinite, or as some just call it, that can be found everywhere, even in a simple flower. Now later Buddhists called this infinite principle also Sunyata, or emptiness. Now what does it mean? It actually has two meanings. You could say first that the essence of things, this underlying force we already talked about, the main inner cause, is so high, so divine, that you cannot name it. You cannot say it has any characteristics, because it is above them all. And so to us, it only can appear as being empty. We cannot give it any labels. It's a bit if you walk into a room and there are some scientists talking about the string theory, you don't know anything about it, it doesn't make any sense to you. For you, it's just like empty talk. So it goes over your head. Now the second meaning, and that is actually from looking, you might say downwards towards the phenomena. We discussed that all these phenomena are constantly transitory, ever-changing, not real in themselves. So you might call these empty as well. For instance, the same thing that happens when one of your kids has his birthday in a few weeks and is really agitated and he's so full of it that his birthday and what presents will he get, etc. And you cannot imagine it anymore. It's more or less empty to you. Or when you're retired and you see all these people running from their work, wearing their suits and ties and being in a lot of hurry, it's just you cannot. For you it's just why are they doing it? It's more or less empty. But, say the Buddhist thinkers, we mustn't confuse this emptiness with just a vacuum, because it stretches to all sides, from the lowest to the highest regions of existence, so it also encompasses Buddha nature. So you might say emptiness is boundless, and this is actually the key thought in Theosophy. Our founder, Madame Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society, named it actually the boundless or boundlessness. And this is the first of the 3 propositions of the secret doctrine, and it is the most important thought that you can find in every great religious or philosophical tradition. But it's every time clad in other words. Plato called it the idea of the good, Lao Tse called it the Tao, and the Buddhists called it Sunyata, or emptiness. But the central thought is this, that there is something that we all partake in, and this is also what we are in essence. Because boundlessness means that everything is it in its inmost core, so that everything has boundless potential, including ourselves. And that is what the Buddhists mean by saying that everything has Buddha nature. Now, boundlessness also means there is oneness, that everything is connected and influences everything else. A thought that obviously has huge moral implications as well. It means brotherhood is a fact, as already pointed out. And you might say that this boundless, that we are in essence, is like the ocean. And that it's actually an illusion if we see ourselves separate from the ocean. It's like distinguishing one wave from the other and saying they are two different things, while they're only temporary phenomena of the same thing, obviously. So why don't we always see this unity and get more or less lost in the variety of things? Well, that is what the Buddhists call Mahamaya, or the great illusion. They say we identify primarily with things that are transitory, that are temporary, seemingly separate, and in essence empty. So we sense them, we measure things, we give them names, and therefore they seem reality, but they are not. And they say they are like the horns of the hare. And we know, of course, the hare does not have horns. If we see a shadow of the hare, we can mistake, of course, his ears for horns. So they say we name things that really do not exist. And they also call it mind only. It's something that's only, something that we create with our own minds. But why do we attribute reality to these temporary phenomena? Well, actually, because we have become attached to these phenomena. We are like the child sitting here who likes to see the hare on the screen when his mother tells him a story. And although these shadows are in themselves illusory, because we identify with these shadows, they become real for us. So if these shadows make us happy, or these shadows make us scared, there's nothing illusory about us being happy or scared. And by illusory, we do not mean that these things do not exist, because shadows do exist. But they are illusory in the sense that something more real is causing them. Some origin we do not yet perceive. So you could say that reality is what we perceive as real. It is that which we have not yet unveiled. We have not yet seen through the illusion of it. Or rather, we do not want to see through the illusion. And I think these are also very important thoughts when you apply those to the subject of stress. Now, after the Buddha died, a lot of Buddhist schools formed, but there were generally two main streams. You have the Theravada or Hinayana tradition that spread mainly in Southeast Asia, and which has its emphasis on reaching enlightenment. And you have the Mahayana tradition that spread north, from India up to China and to Japan. And the Zen tradition is actually an offspring of Mahayana Buddhism. Now, one of Buddha's successors in the Mahayana tradition was Nagarjuna. And he founded the Madhyamika school, or the school of the middle path. And he focused on this idea of sunyata, or emptiness. And therefore the teaching of Nagarjuna is also referred to as no mind, as emptiness transcends the scope of the mind. A later successor of the Buddha is Asanga. And together with his half-brother Vasabandhu, he founded the Yogacara school. And they focused more on this idea of objective idealism, what we just call the idea of the great illusion, that reality is based on what we perceive as real, and that school is also referred to as mind only. Now, these two schools and main ideas in Mahayana Buddhism are in reality just one idea. They are more or less in line with each other. You might say the first takes a more top-down perspective, from the idea of emptiness, the boundless, and the second more a bottom-up perspective, how we perceive things. And you see these two directions alternating through time in Buddhism and also as part of the Zen tradition. Now, after these successors, Nagarjuna and later Asanga, you had Bodhidharma, and he was the 28th Indian patriarch in the lineage of successors. And around the beginning of the 6th century, he was the one that brought Buddhism to China, and thus became the first Chinese patriarch. And when he arrived in China, Bodhidharma was invited by the emperor once he entered China. And the story goes that the emperor was a most devout Buddhist, and he began to boast a bit of all the work that he has done for Buddhism. So he told Bodhidharma, I've built many temples, I built many monasteries, I have copied sacred texts of the Buddha, I have converted and supported a lot of monks and nuns. So you probably can tell me now, what is my merit? More or less, okay, tell me how many karma points have I earned? To which the silent and ferocious-looking Bodhidharma replied, none whatever, Your Majesty. So the emperor was a bit taken aback by this answer, and he tried again, and asked, okay, what is to be considered as the most sacred first principle of the Dharma? And then Bodhidharma answered, vast emptiness and nothing holy therein. And finally, the emperor asked Bodhidharma, okay, who then now confronts me? And Bodhidharma's answer was, I have no idea. So you see that he actually points again to this core idea. And there are some words attributed to Bodhidharma that are used as the maxims of Zen, that it is a special transmission outside the scriptures, no dependence upon words and letters, pointing directly to the heart of man, seeing into one's nature and the attainment of Buddhahood. And you see that they, in Zen tradition, they have a particular place for teachings and meditation and other methods. They say it's just like a finger pointing at the moon. You have to watch out that the finger does not take away your sight of the moon, and that you will mistake the finger for the moon, that the means become more important than the end. So all these scriptures, all these texts, all these methods, meditation, they are just a way to awaken your inner self, your Buddha nature. Now Buddhism quickly became popular in China, and there it also got mixed up with Taoism, which philosophy is very close to it. Of course we say as Theosophists because it's just another branch of the universal wisdom or Theosophy. And this also appears from this quote from one of the famous and early Zen masters, that Buddha is Tao and Tao is Dhyana. And Dhyana, we will discuss that also after the break, is the Sanskrit word for meditation. And from this Sanskrit word dhyana came the Chinese word chan, and from the Chinese word chan came the Japanese word Zen. So actually Zen literally means meditation. So after Bodhidharma, the first patriarch, there was also a lineage of successors, like in India, where each patriarch appointed his successor. And when Hongyan, which was the fifth patriarch, was looking for a successor, the story goes that he organized a sort of contest, asking all the monks to write the essence of Zen in a few lines. Now there was one of his most prominent pupils, Shen Qiu, that wrote the following: The body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a bright mirror stand. Be always diligent in rubbing it. Do not let it attract any dust. And the monks were deeply impressed by this. And it also reminds us Theosophists of one of the lines from The Voice of the Silence from Blavatsky, that mind is like a mirror and it gathers dust. It gathers dust while it reflects. But the following day there was a verse hanging in the monastery by Wei Neng, just an insignificant monk working in the kitchen, but very intuitive. And he wrote, Bodhi is fundamentally without any tree. The bright mirror is also not a stand. Fundamentally, there is not a single thing. where could any dust be attracted? Now, because of this, the fifth patriarch recognized in Hui Neng his successor, handed him his robe and his bowl, but Hui Neng was not recognized by everyone and had to leave the monastery. And thus originated two schools, the Northern Zen school, emphasizing enlightenment as a gradual process that requires study and meditation, and which is later on called the Soto school of Zen. And the Southern school, more or less more in line with Hui Neng, teaching that sudden enlightenment can take place using intuition, and that later on also was called the Rinzai school. Now, these approaches cannot really be set apart, because mostly spiritual progress is a combination of gradual development and sudden insights. So we also recognize a bit the idea of these two approaches of mind only and no mind returning here. Now, be it gradually or suddenly, pupils at the Zen schools learn to awaken their Buddha nature, to attain what in Japanese is called satori, or enlightenment, moments or experience of insight, seeing through illusions or grasping reality. And the teachers, the masters, acts as midwives, you could say, helping the pupil with the birth or awakening of their inner intuition. And therefore they use any means necessary. There are stories of pupils who reached satori while during meditation their teachers suddenly hit them with a stick and they suddenly became enlightened. And there are even stories that some have reached satori because their teacher grasped them by the nose and even pushed them from the stairs. Now, these stories show that insights are not far away, as Buddha nature is to be found everywhere, in the here and the now. But there are more peaceful methods. Just a short story of a monk and his master Joshu. And the monk made a request, who just has entered the monastery asking, okay, please give me instructions, master. And Joshu said, have you had your breakfast? And the monk replied, yes, I have. And then said Joshu, wash your bowls. And that was the moment that this pupil got enlightened. Another method are koans. Those are short paradoxes that the teacher gives to the student to think about and answer. And a very famous one is this one from Hague. What is the sound of one clapping hand? And these koans try also help us to rise above the linear thinking, above just the pure rational intellectual logic, and to awaken our insight, our intuition. Let's take another one. If you meet the Buddha, kill him. What do you think that means? Silence.
We kill ourselves.
Yeah?
Maybe that also the conscious mind of the conscious of a Buddha is also an illusion.
Yeah, you could say that if you, yeah?
If you think that it's a Buddha, maybe you can see the whole Buddha nature of him, so you must skip it, you must kill it, so you can look beyond the Buddha maybe.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. If we create this image of the Buddha, this image really gets in between us and actually going in our own nature, discovering our own inner Buddha nature. So we can make this whole image, oh, we have to be like that, etc., etc., and actually it's only a sort of, something that gets in the way.
Do you mean you shouldn't look outside but on the inside?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is some explanations that are given. You also could say another meaning is that if you reason from boundlessness, there is always a bigger picture. So whatever picture you get of the Buddha, there is always something larger, something wider, always something more to learn. And also that gets in the way.
Until nothingness, until silence.
Yes, exactly. You cannot name it. There's
No
yeah,
identification.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
why I say kill it.
Yeah. And then you really become one with it. You cannot
God.
name it.
Universal.
Yeah. There's nothing to be named. Yeah. But that's actually a process that always goes on.
There's people also who have near-death experience or out-of-body experience explaining about become nothingness or go into a realm of silence,
Yeah.
peace, of love, and experiments who have done in that kind of...
And it's even interesting because if you read about the Buddha reaching enlightenment, he actually describes a lot of stages of enlightenment. And even when he has this enlightenment idea of, okay, I'm just completely one with everything, there is still some illusion in that because...
Go to the extreme.
Yeah, because but you have to, there's always, how do you say, so getting to a sort of stage can be an illusion in itself. So, and that's also that, they always emphasize to be watchful and to be mindful, always to look for, never to get attached to any phase or
You always have
stage.
to keep an open mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. And I think that's also the story of the mountains and waters. Because we can at one point just understand that, the reality has been there all the time, right before our eyes. It's just there, but there's always, how do you say, you can repeat that cycle again and again and again and again. Just find a broader picture of what is, that nameless force that drives everything, that is behind everything. And actually the Zen has a very direct way of pointing to this. Like a Zen master said when a pupil called out to him from the other side of the river, okay, tell me, master, how can I get to the other shore? And the master simply answered, my son, you are already on the other shore. And it's just in the here and now. In other words, we just have to find it within ourselves and try to look from that perspective. So I think you cannot find a better perspective for dealing with stress. So we just have now the perspective of Zen, and after the break we can talk more about stress. But let's give you some room for questions if there are any.
You described two different ways of getting to enlightenment, like
the gradual and
the gradual or an instant.
Mm-hmm.
Does that also mean that there's no one approach is not better or more appropriate than the other, or is there a difference?
I was trying to say that actually it's a bit of in reality also you don't see you see both approaches in schools. The one has just a more emphasis on the one direction, but in general they're on the same line, because you cannot have it's very difficult to get to a sudden insight without any preparation. And even if you have like this gradual study, you will have moments of more sudden insight. So actually, they're more on the same line. I don't think it's you can really set them apart that way. So it's really okay. Then you have a gradual, and then you have sudden insight, and then you go on and develop, and then you have some sudden insight. But they just want to point out not to be at one of those extremes. Because these extremes are sometimes that, okay, only meditation, and then suddenly an insight would come. Or, only studying text. No, you have to bring also things into practice. And then you get sudden insights. And of course it helps when you do both at the same time. And I think that it's more or less in the same line. You have to do both. Yeah.
But both you have to do in the end by yourself.
Of course.
So there's not an external,
No.
not a master throwing you down the stairs or.
No. The only thing
It has
that
to come from
yeah.
within.
Yeah, the only thing the master can do is just
Guide you.
guide you and like more or less like a midwife, help you in the awakening and give you some hints, some things to think about, like these koans, for instance. There are a lot of these stories, like the teachers hitting their, and I think that's really part of more or less the culture at that time in China, where they were really fond of these stories, and it's still part of the humor. If you look at Japanese TV or Chinese TV, it's full of those really pretty harsh humor, and I think that's also a way to spread the message, more or less. And of course, there is some sort of mystical relation between teachers and pupils. So I think if the pupil really is serving the teacher well and more or less also working as an instrument for the teacher, and they get more close, then they can work more together, and the teacher also can be more of help at a certain point of time to help the student get over something or reach some sort of insight. Yeah.
Yeah, but all the mystical teachers are shown the same way. Zen, Sufi, Gnosticism,
Yeah.
all show the same way.
Yeah, the Greeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Only we are being so ignorant to don't follow them. Not follow, but not practice what they show to
Yeah.
us, what they live for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
We mean that is a fairy tale.
Yeah. And they are actually, like you say, they're all studying the same things. They all point to something that we are part of something bigger,
Yeah.
and that we
We are limited in this
have to
physical
forget
body.
ourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
And we're too much engaged in this material world, in this physical body and everything,
Yeah.
that we forget that we're all one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, time for a break. All right. So we started with why from stress to Zen and some ideas about what is Zen exactly. So now it's time for stress. Okay. What they say from research is that stress is a pretty personal thing. Researchers point at some innate characteristics in combination with environmental and also psychological factors. And that say that some people are much more sensitive to stress than others. They have less resilience. And they say that the following characteristics make us vulnerable. Perfectionism, so-called type A factors, which are ambition, focus on achieving, competition, hurry, not being able to sit still and do nothing, often doing two things at the same time, seeking the appreciation of others is a factor, feeling of having little influence on the environment and one's own life, pessimism and not a very positive view on own performance, but also a great sense of responsibility, strong commitment to family or work, but in combination with demanding a lot from oneself and saying, I have to, and also having difficulty with saying no, difficulty with setting boundaries or standing up for oneself. Now, stress literally means tension, and it can also be a very positive thing. If you have to achieve something, that your heartbeat is increasing a bit, that you can be more alert, for instance, when you're driving in the heavy traffic or something. But when it is applied in a negative form, it is also described as that people say to themselves that they're not able to cope or handle it anymore. So that is that basic idea. And in English it's also called distress, the negative form. So there you see also that idea of I am not able to cope or handle it anymore. And we can ask ourselves also from this point of view from Zen and Theosophy, who is this I actually? Now to start with one of the sayings of the Buddha, he said that all that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. Now you can draw a sort of scheme for every, you could say, living being or consciousness, and you can find it in Buddhism as well, but it's a Theosophical way of showing it as being composed of 7 aspects. So you could say that there's a composition of, for any being you can make, of 7 aspects working together. You could see every being as a stream of consciousness originating from the boundless. And for each consciousness, you can distinguish firstly the Atman, or self, or the divine principle, the Buddhi, or the enlightening principle, the Manas, the thinking principle, Kama, desire principle, Prana, life energy, Linga, Sharira, or the astral body, and Sthula, Sharira, or the outer body. Now some of these principles for some consciousness, for some beings, have not yet been developed and are still latent, and others have been developed or are being developed. Now man is currently working on developing the thinking principle or consciousness, and that is the Manas. That's where also the word man comes from. So men are thinkers, and we have not yet developed the Buddhi principle or the Atman principle, and we should have be completely in how do you say, ruling or reigning the lower principles. Now, we already discussed that there are 2 types of thinking before, when we talked about how to see truth, how to recognize it. And you can say there is thinking that makes us identify more with the sense of unity there is. We can call that the above personal perspective. And you can also identify more with this illusion of being separate of the whole. This idea of just being, a wave in the big ocean. Just basing your reality only from what your senses say, your experiences, your own opinions. We can make a further distinction, and we can divide this thinking principle into 7 aspects, 7 thinking aspects, which correspond to these 7 consciousness principles. And that's more easy for us to recognize. So we can say that when we use our physical thinking, we identify with our body. We say, I am hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, etc. According to emotion, then we identify more with our feelings, saying, I'm scared, I'm angry, I'm sad, or I'm happy. Vitality is when we identify with the tasks that we have to do, getting things done, and also wanting to do it ourselves, maybe. Desire is when we identify with our desires or longings. That can be materialistic desires, wanting to have something, but also desire for more subtle things like results or honor or status. These are more treacherous. But in general, desire is a neutral force, and you can also have positive desires, such as love or wisdom or philanthropy. Then we have the intellect. We all know this. It is the reasoning, the logic, the rationality. Very good at compartmentalizing, naming everything, and can seem enlightening, but it's not. It's very good at telling what is not, and not really so good in what is, or what is the bigger picture. But it's the first step towards getting to more universal knowledge. What we also discussed with this mountains and waters story. And the first step is science, measuring, trying to find out more, investigating, etc. Then we have the insight or understanding, more recognizing the coherence of things, understanding the laws of nature, for instance. That's also where intuition is, has its place. And that corresponds with the second step of seeing truth, philosophy. And then we have the sense of unity. And in general, as human beings, we haven't developed that yet so much. It's only, we have it only in flashes of intuition, or these mystical moments that are described when people read Satori, for instance, very rare. And that's actually the last step of seeing truth, and that corresponds with religion. So we can distinguish these 7 types of thinking. In our course, Thinking Differently, we will practice a lot more with this. And and it's very important, because then you recognizing this is the first step to also directing these thoughts. Because if we look more at what thinking is, you could say thinking is just seeing thoughts. And we always have thoughts. Our mind is like, is mirror-like. It's also, everything what happens is mirrored in the mind. Also physical sensations or feelings or insights. Now thoughts live and they grow through awareness or attention. And they are cyclical of nature. We can recognize this with just getting up each day. We have all these thoughts returning again from, okay, what is do we have for breakfast, and what clothes I'd like to wear, etc., etc. But also in the year, Easter is coming, so now everybody sees bunnies and eggs and things like that. There's also cyclical patterns of thoughts. And also concerns or worries are typical cyclical thoughts. That's something you really wish that you don't want to happen, and you keep on placing your attention on these thoughts, just repeating them over and over again. Well, we are both transmitter and receiver of thoughts. Even if we don't pronounce them, they are transmitted. So we also, if we are on the right frequency, we can also, you could say, catch thoughts from others. And we can direct our thought. And that's actually what we are teaching in our course, Thinking Differently, how to control and learn to direct your thinking. And seeing through illusions and replacing them with more universal thoughts. For instance, in your work, you have all these targets. You can worry a lot by, okay, will I reach my targets? But you could also take a step back, think of a bigger picture. Okay, what are we actually doing with our organizations? how do we add value to society? What is our purpose here? And more identify with that. And then you forget about these targets, you just do what is needed. And I guess that will be a lot less stressful. Now, talking about stress, the Tao Te Ching from Lao Tse, the short scripture full of paradoxes, says it very concisely. And I use the translation of Addis and Lombardo. I can really recommend that. And he writes, favor and disgrace are like fear. Honor and distress are like the self. What does this mean? Favor debases us, afraid when we get it, afraid when we lose it. The self embodies distress. No self, no distress. Respect the world as yourself. The world can be your lodging. Love the world as yourself. The world can be your trust. So it's very short, huh? Honor and distress are like the self. No self, no distress. Now what is this self? What does he mean with the self? Well, in case of stress, the lower self, the personal self, the one that identifies more with being separate from the one, is especially prominent. And mostly when we are in stress, we have a certain expectation, things we have to do, things we have to achieve, and we personally attach to that. And that colors and filters our perception in the here and now. It gets in between of, well, just the here and the now. For instance, what if you are not daring to say no against someone asking you to do something? Does it stem from the fear that others will lose the image you think they have of you? That you perhaps are afraid that what they will think of you when you stand up for yourself? Of course, we can never judge this by others as an outsider, but it's something we really have to check honestly with ourselves. And this can be very subtle, because it is also personal thinking if we are judging ourselves. Thoughts like, I haven't finished this task, I'm not doing well enough, and I have to do better next time. And we think, okay, that's something we direct ourselves towards something. But when we are judging, it's always the personality, the I am I, that really tries to confirm itself. Now we also already defined stress as the emotional uncertainty about something that we cannot handle. But if we see that the personal self, the one separate from others, is really an illusion, what is then impossible for us to handle? Because we can always handle it when we focus on unity, when we trust in the harmony of the whole. For example, if you are struggling to get a task done and you just make known to others on what goal you are working, and mostly it's not only a goal for yourself, it's a common goal you're working at, and you just need some help with it, you will see that others will be happy to fill in some gaps for you. And you do not worry about yourself, but about a greater job that has to be done. So with stress you see a strong and mostly unconscious focus, because we mostly do not recognize these thinking principles, but a focus on the I am I part, the part that in us that thinks he's separate, apart from others. And sometimes it's really clear. We discuss these characteristics as ambition and competition, so then it's very clear that we are competing, we are seeing us as different from others. But often it's also very subtle. Especially this desire aspect of thinking. Let me name another example. We also say a lot of times that we are very busy. But what is being busy actually? Well, busy with what? Busy is nothing. It's just something empty. So you're busy with what? And actually you find out, and if you really take a look at, if you're saying when you're busy, it's most of the times it's just all kinds of things that you have in your mind all this at the same time, and you're not really choosing what to do in the moment, just one thing at a time. So you have to do, of course, if you have to think about it, and that needs some difficulty, you have to be aware with that, and you have to focus yourself. Okay, what is the most important thing to do? But instead of that, we're just going to check our emails and just, okay, then we're finished with our emails, and then, okay, we have a good feeling about ourselves, we have finished all these emails, but what has it really done with the job we had to do? And mostly our attention is more spread because we are still in all these messages that came up. So actually we were then running from one distraction in the other. And you could say busyness is more a state of restless and undirected desire thinking. Now these stories in the Zen just make it just very short, clear exactly. There's a story that a man on a horse suddenly came galloping quickly down the road. It seemed as though he had something very important he had to go. And there was another man standing alongside the road, and he shouted to the man, "Where are you going?" And the man on the horse replied, "I don't know, ask the horse." And this is exactly what is going on. So this horse just symbolizes our habit of just going on mindlessly, just with our desires going everywhere. We are not really steering, just being a slave of our surroundings and not really thinking independently, deciding what to be done. But we have the reins and we can start steering the horse. And that's also what Blavatsky said in the Secret Doctrine, that desire is the steed and thought is the rider. And there's another nice quote, but yesterday I discovered this, it cannot be found by William James, but anyway, it's a nice quote on the internet, that the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over the other. So we can always, using our thinking, steer in the right way. And we are more in harmony when the higher aspects of thinking are leading, and the lower aspects are serving actually these higher aspects. The sense of unity, insight, intuition, and also a bit the intellect, but not only separately the intellect, but the intellect that is also serving these higher intuitions and this idea of oneness. So how to practice that? We will show you that in a minute, inspired by the Zen tradition. But let's finish our definition of stress using these this idea of these thinking aspects, that you could say that stress is always a consequence of thinking in separateness, of a subtle identification with the personal self, the I am I. Now, what has the Zen tradition to offer for us to get out of stress? Now, one Zen master put it in some very short lines. He said, to study the way is to study the self, with a capital S. To study the self is to forget the self, with a lowercase s. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by all things of the universe. How can we practice this? Well, Blavatsky first starts with pointing to the motive. She says to live to benefit mankind is the first step, and to practice the 6 glorious virtues is the second. And that's also very logical, because if we reason from this perspective of the boundless oneness, then of course compassion is the central motive, because there is nothing as separateness. We all work for, the bigger thing, the whole. There is interconnectedness always. So actually we're in an illusion when we see things we only have to do for ourselves. So this motive of compassion is essential, and she names the 6 glorious virtues, but she actually from the Theosophical, he adds a seventh one. And these are these glorious virtues. And there you see that dhyana, or meditation, or Zen, as we already talked about, is just one of these 7 virtues. So also there you cannot see it as separate from the other 6. Again, this is something we can spend, well, more than an afternoon on, so it's just something we can just point to shortly. And we have, if you are interested, of course, books we can recommend about these 7 virtues. So dana, love, immortal, or charity. And therefore we have to overcome selfishness or hatred. Shila, harmony in word and act. We have to overcome doubt and hypocrisy. Shanti, patience sweet that not can ruffle. We have to overcome fear, anger, frustration. Viraga, indifference to pleasure and pain. Also overcoming vanity and attachment. Virya, dauntless energy or courage, overcoming laziness. Dhyana, spiritual meditation. And in the light of compassion meaning also overcoming complacency or smugness. And to end with prajna, or the intuitive wisdom, the key to which makes of a man a god. And then we overcome our ignorance. So how do we practice dhyana? And we take a little piece of the Mahayana Sutra, the Awakening of Faith, from Ashvaghosha. And he writes, or actually they think Ashvaghosha is the writer. He writes that to understand that all things follow the law of causation, but are transitory and empty. So the law of causation is meaning the law of karma. Karma is real, there are a lot of consequences happening. All the things that happen in this world are real. But a lot of karma is caused by attachment to phenomena that really aren't real. Take, for instance, the example, if we have an irrational fear of appearing not working so hard. Did I say Siri? Okay. So if we have an irrational fear of appearing that we don't work hard enough, then the result might be that we reply to emails late in the evening. But this leads to the idea of your colleagues that they also have to reply immediately to emails in the evening and in the weekends, etc. Which slowly creates a culture where everybody is in this tight grip of direct responding to email communication without hardly any time to think, etc. So you see that there is, these subtle illusory things can become real, and all this busy doings we have. Well, in the end, it's just it starts with our own thoughts and our own ideas, and most of the times illusions. So secondly is to suppress idle thinking, and therefore you need concentrated attention of mind at all times. We also call this mindfulness. To realize the emptiness of mind essence, and then prejudices and illusions will vanish. A deep compassion for the suffering of all ignorant beings suffering from illusory thoughts. So if you reach that point that you see through the illusions, it doesn't mean, okay, I know better than all these people, and I feel really good of myself. No, because if we're really one with others, then we don't separate ourselves, and we still are identifying also with the others that still suffer from those illusions. And that's also meaning overcoming this complacency or smugness. And in the end, the vows to live for the emancipation of all beings. And then we get to the Bodhisattva vow, and that has a central place in many Zen schools. And sometimes there are 4 lines, here are 5. The first is, beings are boundlessly many. I vow to liberate them all. Also there we see that idea of boundlessness returning. Merit and wisdom are limitless. I vow to marshal them. The Dharma of the Buddha is infinite. I vow to master it. The Tathagatas are countless. I vow to serve them. And the Tathagata means the persons that have gone to the other shore. That means the state of higher consciousness that already, above our limitless idea of separatedness. And at last, I vow to realize the unsurpassed right enlightenment. Now this sounds as a really far away and big thing, but actually, well, if there is boundlessness, this is always true, and it's just in the here and now. So, and that's also what, to contrast this with what also they say in the Zen tradition, is, for instance, when someone was asked, what is Tao? He just says, it's usual life. It's just usual life. It's just in the here and now. And when he was asked, okay, how does one accord with it? His answer was, if you try to accord with it, you will get away from it. So, yeah, it's just, those are really interesting things to think about. And you can actually recognize this in the whole history of Zen. It's actually the same idea that was in this flower sermon of the Buddha, in this shiny mirror of Huineng that's nowhere to be found, or in this idea of the mountains and the seas. It says that wherever you are, that the highest attainable is just in the here and now. And we just need the right view to see it and also to act from it. And when we identify with the greater whole, the interconnectedness of everything, then our smallest duties in life become the way to achieve great things. And this is actually also the most natural thing. Think of a mother that takes care of her child. She will also always help her child by being mindful, being concentrated, with the best intentions in the moment. And this practice is just something we have to do. It's just a path of action also. It's not just sitting still passively for a few moments a week. And we can practice these glorious virtues, these paramitas, we've shown, just by applying them during the daily errands in life. As Gottfried de Perucker said, by becoming great in small things, we learn to become great in great things. Another way the Zen teachers try to express that is by this saying from Huineng, no work, no food. They made also work an important part of the life in the Zen monasteries. They did not rely on alms or gifts or donations, but were self-supporting as much as they could. And they followed this adage very seriously, as also is illustrated by the following story of the Zen master Hyakyo. And he's a Chinese Zen master, and he used to labor with his pupils even at the age of 80, trimming the gardens, cleaning the grounds, and pruning the trees. And the pupils felt a bit sorry for him to see this old teacher working so hard, but they knew he would not listen to their advice to stop. So what they did instead was just hid away his tools. And that day the master did not eat. And the next day he did not eat, nor the next day. And so the pupils thought, okay, he may be angry because we have hidden his tools. We better put them back. So that day they did. And the next day the teacher worked with them again in the garden and ate with them the same as before. And in the evening he instructed them, no work, no food. Another story of Hyakyo was when he was asked by one of his pupils, how do you practice Zen? And he said, when hungry, eat, when tired, sleep. So the pupils asked, well, isn't that what everybody does? Aren't you just like ordinary people? Oh no, he said. They don't do anything of the kind. When they're hungry, they don't just eat. They have 1,000 desires and think of all sorts of things. And when they're tired, they don't just sleep. They scheme over 1,000 plans and dream all sorts of dreams. So that's actually some lessons we can draw from that. And to end with this quote from Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist, and he was also someone that survived the Holocaust. And he was already a psychiatrist when he was in the concentration camps. And he learned that there is a very big difference between those that survived and those that couldn't. And one of the main differences, the survivors could still discover meaning in life by still being able to enjoy the smallest things in life, just a ray of sunlight peeking through, or having a bit of food that they could share with others, and making fun of each other. And actually what he says here, their tension is part of life. It is part of movement, it's part of growth. And we don't actually need a tension state, but we need something that is worth living for. And if we really focus on the unity of life and see that as and use that as a perspective, then we will always have the resilience to cope with anything that challenges us in life. So actually that's, I think, a nice way to end this lecture. So summarizing, what did we talk about? We actually could say that Zen is seeing into one's nature, and by that we mean seeing and acting from Buddha nature, from the other shore, the idea that, actually there is unity. That thinking is the perceiving of thoughts, that thoughts live and grow through attention. That stress is the consequence of personal thinking. And that when we forget ourselves, that there's really nothing that we cannot handle. And if we have this motive of living to benefit mankind, then we can just cope with anything. And how to practice Zen? Well, usual life. And so you could say how to get from stress to Zen is by developing a universal vision of life, this idea of the oneness there is, and trying to act accordingly to it as much as we can. Okay, are there any questions? Yes.
You mentioned somewhere in your lecture the vows of the Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
And the fifth one, I didn't quite understand. I didn't understand the English. Something that...
Just a moment, I will get back to it.
The last one.
I vow to realize the unsurpassed right enlightenment.
Maybe you can say something about it.
Well, actually, how I see these vows are really to see it in the perspective of boundlessness. Because it shows that actually we brought ourselves in the illusion of being separate of this whole. Well, actually, the most natural thing is that everything works for everything. And this is not something that is, how do you say, that has an end. That there's some sort of final end we can reach. Because reasoning from boundless, there's always beings that we can liberate. There's always more wisdom that we can marshal. There's always Dharma we can master. And I think that is the real enlightenment, that we see that we recognize that. And so it might look like an endpoint, but it's actually, the endpoint is the ongoing thing. Yeah, the ongoing process. Yeah. And the thing is also, it sounds like, okay, Bodhisattva vow, this is very far away, but actually we are the Bodhisattva already. This Buddha nature, it's in the here and the now. And actually, if we have the right motive, we can more or less, because all things are interconnected, because there is always beings that try to spread the Dharma, spread this wisdom, that if we have the right motive, we actually make ourselves a sort of instrument for these higher beings, this higher knowledge to sort of channel through. So actually, that's when the insights come. It's just in normal life. It's just when we have the right motive. We think, someone is struggling here. How can we help him? And we really think about it from an impersonal perspective, from a large, and then we get answers, and then we know what to say, and we know what piece of the Dharma to speak of, and help others.
Good example in the nature of the trees, with the roots in the ground. The best example is the nature.
You have to explain that a bit for me.
Yeah, because the roots, when you put it on the soil, they keep the soil don't lose.
Yeah,
Don't
exactly.
go away.
Yeah.
So all the roots keep the soil.
Yeah.
So the human can learn from nature.
Yeah.
They all keep together. They are all creating the web of life.
Yeah. Yeah. We will talk a lot about that next month. When we talk about spiritual perspective on sustainability, about these ecosystems, about how you can recognize in nature that everything is interconnected.
You are not by accident created on this earth.
Yeah.
There is a meaning also.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Hope we don't use the chance.
First, we have to recognize that. Yeah. Other questions? No? Okay, we always end with the Gayatri from the Rig Veda, one of the most sacred texts from the Hindu tradition. And it actually is a call to our higher self, you could say the Buddha nature. And we have 7 strokes of the gong and a short moment of silence afterwards. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light.